I really doubt that Russia and Iran will not be able to scrape together enough military reinforcements to stabilize the fighting lines. It could be well south of Aleppo, but well short of Damascus.
But our top story, more than 370 people, including at least 20 civilians, have been killed since the coalition of Islamist and secular Turkish-backed groups launched a surprise offensive against the Syrian government on Wednesday. Rebel fighters captured the city of Aleppo yesterday and are reportedly moving south in what is being seen as the biggest challenge to President Bashar al-Assad's regime in years. Joining us now is Robert Ford. He's the former and indeed the last US ambassador to Syria before Syria cut diplomatic relations with the US. He held that position in 2011 all the way through to 2014. Robert Ford, thank you for giving us your time.
It's my pleasure to be with you.
What do you make of the last goings on in Syria in the last 24, 48 hours?
Well, the first thing is, I think almost everybody, including the Syrian opposition fighters themselves, are surprised by how quickly they have been able to advance. I do not think that we're going to see the fall of Damascus like the fall of Kabul in 2021. We're very far away from that. But certainly, the Syrian opposition fighters are consolidating their hold on Syria's second largest city, Aleppo.
Do you have any idea of the timing of this attack? Is there significance that perhaps Iran has been weakened, Russia is occupied in Ukraine? Do you think there is a significance in the timing of this attack?
Oh, what you were just saying is absolutely right. Bashar al-Assad has always, going back to the beginning of the Syrian uprising, Bashar al-Assad has always depended on Russia and Iran to survive. And as you note, Iran is much weakened. Its Lebanese Hezbollah ally has been severely bloodied in Lebanon. And Russia, in the meanwhile, is busy with Ukraine. The exact timing, I think, has to do with both the ceasefire in Lebanon and Turkey looking at that ceasefire and saying, okay, now is a good time for us to let the Syrian opposition fighters unleash their offensive. It had been long planned. And at the same time, the Turks, I think, were annoyed that Bashar al-Assad had declined to meet President Erdogan.
Do you think that President Bashar al-Assad has got enough backing in order to withstand the opposition forces?
I do, and I do for two reasons. Number one, I really doubt that Russia and Iran will not be able to scrape together enough military reinforcements to stabilize the fighting lines. It could be well south of Aleppo, but well short of Damascus. And at the same time, the whole history of the Syrian uprising is that the Syrian opposition, and in particular its armed opposition elements, fight each other as much as they fight the Syrian government. And I don't see a lot of signs of unity yet among Syrian opposition ranks. Instead, I see different factions still competing, even on the ground. For example, today, some of the Turkish-backed fighters are heading off to fight Syrian Kurdish militia, not the government.
What do you think is going to be the reaction from the US and the UK? The US have said they have had nothing to do with the opposition fighters, but at some point, do you think that there is going to have to be a reaction, perhaps from the incoming Trump government, and also a reaction from the UK as well?
Well, I'm going to defer to you to explain the British government's position. I can tell you
Very diplomatic over there.
From this side of the pond, the Biden administration, of course, has never really been engaged ever on Syria. And President Trump, in his first term of office, wanted to get out of Syria entirely. He called Syria a land of sand and death. My guess is that Turkish President Erdogan, who had a pretty good working relationship with Donald Trump in the first Trump administration. I think President Erdogan would be very happy to see the American forces depart. And we must admit that out of the recent fighting the last couple of days, Turkey's position in Syria is much stronger than it was even 10 days ago. So I could imagine that the Biden administration isn't going to engage much. They aren't really involved in this Aleppo fighting. And they put out an announcement to that effect from the White House yesterday. Uh, when the Trump team comes into office, my guess is they'll be looking for ways to disengage from Syria and leave it to their friends, the Turks, and to work out a deal with the Russians.
And do you think that is a mistake? Do you think that Syria, having been left to its own devices, has been a mistake because you are leaving a void that has been filled by all sorts of organizations vying for power?
Oh, well, I'm going to be very honest here. When I was in the Obama administration, we tried to intervene in Syria, not directly. We didn't send U.S. troops, but we did send assistance to some of the armed opposition elements, and it was a total failure. I mean, it was a bad failure. So I'm not at all sure that now is the time for countries like the United States to come rushing back into Syria. I have my doubts about that. And I think there is some strategic wisdom at the geopolitical level for the Americans to focus their attention, particularly limited military resources, on other parts of the world, such as the Far East or even Ukraine, than to get involved in a conflict in Syria, which we have never really deeply understood and where the United States does not have massive interests.
And just finally, how safe do you think President Bashar al Assad is in the next coming weeks? Is he likely to go anywhere? You think he's going to stay put?
Yeah, that's a great question. I must admit, I was wondering what was going on with Assad when he was in Moscow for so long, because he made a trip up to Moscow to plead for help urgently, came back to Syria yesterday. Uh, I think he's safe for now. You know, the Syrian government has four different secret police services. Most countries in the Middle East have one. Syria has four, and the reason is they all spy on each other as well as spying on the Syrian public and the Syrian army. And the idea is to catch any coup plotters early on. And that system actually works pretty well. So it's ruthless, it's bloody, it's awful, but it's efficient.
Robert Ford, thank you so much for giving us your time. I really appreciate it. Fascinating to hear your view. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Robert Ford, there, former and indeed the last US ambassador to Syria between 2011 and 2014.